The tiger wasn't breathing. It was suffocating. It was suffocating in the smoke that had been hanging like a wall for 2 weeks now. It wasn't the clean, invigorating smell of a bonfire. It was the heavy, sour, acrid stench of thousands of tons of burning peat, dry pine needles, and dead, dried-out wood. The summer, which was supposed to be a celebration of life, had turned into a funeral pyre. The sun had turned from a ball of fire into a dim, crimson pupil, barely breaking through the veil of smoke. And on that day, it came. Not the low, creeping fire that could be escaped. A fiery storm came. It was born when the wind changed. It leaped across the river, climbed the hills, and drove everything alive before it, like a shepherd driving a herd to slaughter. It was no longer fire. It was a red, roaring beast, and it had only one instinct: to devour. They were the first to sense it. Hares, 3 grey balls of panic. They didn't run. They flew, their ears pressed against their backs, their hearts seemingly about to burst in their chests. Their flight was blind. They rushed forward, driven by a primal, all-consuming terror, without regard for the road ahead. Behind them, no longer as a hunter but as a fellow fugitive, a fox was running. Red-haired, usually cunning and calculating, she had lost all dignity. Her mischief, her intelligence, her ability to outwit anyone, all of it had burned up in the roar of the flames. She ran side by side with her prey, gasping for breath, but her hunting instinct was dead. There was only the instinct to survive. She whimpered as she ran, her tongue hanging out, her eyes filled with the same terror as the hares. And last, like a ghostly shadow, a lynx glided by. She was the mistress of this forest. Lonely, silent, the perfect predator. She had never run from anything in her life. She was the one they ran from. But today, she too was prey. Her broad, soft paws, designed for silent steps on snow, now slid uselessly across the dry, cracked ground. The fire was chasing them. It cut off their path to the river. It cut off their path to the swamps. Like a clever herder, it drove them to the only place where they thought they could find salvation. Upward. They jumped onto a rocky ledge. It was an old kurumnik, a pile of giant moss-covered boulders, a bare granite bald spot on the body of the taiga. They climbed to the very top, to the flat summit of the cliff, and froze. And at that moment, the fiery beast snapped its jaws shut. A wall of flame, roaring like 1,000 jet engines, curved around the base of the cliff on both sides and closed in. The trees standing by the rock burst into flames like matches. The air turned into a red-hot furnace. There was no way back. They were trapped. On a rocky island, no more than 50 square meters in size, surrounded on all sides by a raging, impassable sea of fire. The point of no return had been reached. For a few seconds, time seemed to stand still. The sound receded, leaving only the echoing beat of their own hearts. The unwritten law was broken first. One of the hares, recoiling in blind panic from the wall of fire, turned around and saw her. The lynx. She was standing 10 paces away. The hare froze. He stood still, trembling so much that his body became a blurry spot. He was caught between 2 deaths. The fire, which was heat, and the predator, which was ice. The fox turned around and saw the same scene. Hares, lynx. Her cunning brain calculated the situation in a split second. The hares were paralyzed. The lynx was looking at the fire. It was a chance. The lynx, in turn, sensed them. The smell of panic, the smell of warm blood. Her muscles instinctively tensed. Prey. Easy prey. She was hungry, exhausted. And now, in this hell, she was being presented with a feast. She slowly turned her head. And at that moment, the 100-year-old pine tree at the foot of the cliff exploded. It didn't just burn. The overheated sap inside the trunk boiled, and the tree blew apart like a bomb. There was a deafening crack, and a rain of burning embers and splinters fell on their rocky island. A wave of unbearable, scorching heat hit them in the face, singeing their moustaches and eyelashes. And that explosion cancelled everything. The ancient predator-prey instinct collided with an instinct that was even older, an all-consuming, absolute fear of fire. And fire won. The fox, having received a painful burn on its side, yelped and rushed, not toward the hares, but past them. It hid in the farthest, coldest, if that word was even applicable, crevice in the rock, tucked its tail between its legs, and whimpered like a beaten puppy. It was no longer a predator. It was prey. The hares, stunned by the explosion, instinctively did the same. They rushed to the same crevice, seeking shelter, and huddled next to the fox. They trembled side by side. The smell of the fox's fur mingled with their own scent of terror, but now it didn't matter. The fox was not a threat. The threat roared from all sides, but the most frightening sight was the lynx. The queen of the forest, the embodiment of silent power, was broken. She did not hide in a crevice. She stood in the middle of the clearing, her body shaking uncontrollably. She stared at the wall of fire, and the flames were reflected in her amber eyes. But it was not a reflection, it was horror. She opened her mouth, but what came out was not a roar, but a hoarse, choked cough. The smoke was burning her lungs. She knew she was going to die. They all knew it. They sat on that scorching rock, predators and prey, united by a single fate. They were no longer a lynx, a fox, and hares. They were simply prisoners awaiting execution. The hunting instinct had not simply faded away. It had evaporated, burned away, leaving behind only the scorched earth of shared animal terror. The stones beneath their paws were becoming unbearably hot. It was then that the lynx began to move. Her instinct to run uphill, which had doomed her, was replaced by another, a feline one, to look for a way out. She didn't rush around like a fox. She began to methodically examine her little island, crouching down on the hot rocks. She walked along the very edge where the smoke was thicker, but the heat, as it seemed to her, was slightly weaker. The fox and the hares, huddled together in a trembling ball, watched her. The lynx approached the far edge of the cliff. It was almost a sheer drop. But here, in the shadow of a huge boulder, she found what she was looking for. It wasn't a path. It was a crack, a narrow crevice in the rock, as if a giant had split the granite with an axe. It didn't lead sideways, but steeply down into the darkness filled with smoke. And from there, from below, there was no smell of smoke, but something else, a damp coolness. There, 100 meters below, was a river. The lynx did not hesitate. She was made for rocks. She squeezed her flexible, powerful body through the narrow opening and disappeared. For a few seconds, the island grew quiet. The fox raised her head. She could see where the lynx had gone. She sniffed, and she caught it too. The ghostly, impossible scent of damp earth. The fire behind her roared, urging her on. The fox had a choice. Burn here, or go into the dark, narrow hole where her worst enemy had just disappeared. She chose the hole. Squealing with fear, she rushed to the crevice and, sliding awkwardly, began her descent. Only the hares remained. They saw the two predators disappear into the jaws of the rock, one after the other. But the stones beneath their paws were already burning hot, and so, driven by a last desperate hope, they hopped after them. The descent was a nightmare. It was an almost vertical pipe full of sharp rocks. They slipped, they fell, they tumbled down, but they moved, and they got out. They tumbled out of the smoke and heat onto the cool, wet pebbles of the riverbank. The air was clean. It was cold. It was filled with the sound of rushing water. They were saved. The fox, covered in bruises and scrapes, crawled to the water and began to lap it up greedily. The hares, who had rolled out last, froze on the shore, unable to believe their salvation. And then they saw her, a lynx. She hadn't gone away. She was sitting on a large, flat rock right by the water, only 5 meters away. She had gotten out first. She was dry and clean. She sat there and looked at them. The fox, seeing her, froze with water on her whiskers. She pressed herself to the ground, waiting for the deadly leap. The hares were petrified. They had gone from one trap to another. The lynx had led them here, as if to a pantry. It was the perfect ambush. But the lynx did not move. It sat like a statue. It looked at the fox. It looked at the hares. Its amber eyes were calm. There was no hunger in them. There was only the same endless, all-consuming fatigue as at the top of the cliff. Up there, the fire was still roaring. It had not been defeated. It was just far away. But its presence, its heat, which could still be felt in the air, was a guarantee of their fragile truce. The lynx slowly turned its head, and looked at the fire roaring behind the cliff, then back at them. It was a silent act. She was not hunting. She was not their enemy. Right now, she was as much a fugitive as they were. The fox was the first to realize this. Slowly, backing away, keeping her eyes on the lynx, she began to retreat along the shore. She wasn't running, she was leaving. The lynx let her. Seeing that the fox was leaving and the lynx was not moving, the hares came to their senses, and in the next second, like two grey lightning bolts, they rushed in the opposite direction into the safety of the coastal bushes. The lynx did not even turn its head to follow them. She remained alone on the rock, the guardian of this impossible salvation. She looked at the fast, dark water, and behind her, at the top of the cliff, their shared nightmare was burning out. A catastrophe so great that it cancelled out nature itself, creating an absolute, impossible truce for one terrible hour.